This warlike people taught their battle tactics to the Romans themselves. The Roxolans were one of the largest Sarmatian tribes, spreading north and northeast from the Black Sea. The power of the Roxolans in these lands was short-lived, but the original and bright people left their eternal mark in history. About the origin of the name of this people argue to this day. According to one version of the word Roxolans comes from the Iranian ruksa, meaning radiance. In any case, the people of Roksolan really differed from many other tribes inhabiting the steppe territories of the Black Sea region. Mentions of the Roxolans date back to the 2nd century BC. Historians of deep antiquity note that these were tribes of nomads who were well versed in weapons, almost from infancy learned to ride, as well as skillfully handled wagons, which was used both in life and in battle. This people spent a lot of wars. In the sources of antiquity it is written that the Roxolans not once conquered new lands, expanding their own territory. If in the beginning it was only a small tribe living near the sea, then later they turned into a powerful people who advanced to the Caucasus and to the lands of the Roman Empire. It is worth noting that part of the Roman lands Roxolans at one time even appropriated themselves without getting involved in wars. On their borders it was difficult to control some areas, which was used by representatives of this cunning people. Increasing in number and conquering new territories, the Roxolans were already confidently asserting their rights. Together with Roman emperors, they participated in battles and military campaigns, taking their tribute for it. Roxolans were excellent horsemen and warriors, and the Romans, who valued the art of combat, it was just right. But it was the increased strength of nomads that began to worry Rome, and therefore border skirmishes and conflicts began. During the numerous wars with Rome, the Roxolans more than once showed special tactics. Their striking force was a line of warriors armed with spears. Such riders rushed to the enemy, striking his first ranks and sowing panic. Later, this type of attack became one of the signature techniques of the Romans. Ancient historians note that since the 2nd century AD in the Roman army noticeable changes. There were more spearmen who hold weapons and fight in the Sarmatian way. However, it is not excluded that such a change was explained only by the presence of Roxolans in the Roman ranks. Often Roxolans became hired guards of the rulers. It is known that quite a few Roman emperors, fearing an enemy plot or attack, kept a few soldiers Roxolans. It was for their performance, reliability, and fighting skills that they were made their closers. But let's go back a little and go into more detail. Strabo clearly localizes the Roxolans in the steppes between Borisfen Dnieper and Tanais Don, noting that they winter near the coast of Meotida, Sea of Azov, and in summer they migrated to the north. How far inland is unknown, as well as it is unknown who exactly lives to the north of the Roxolans. At the same time, Strabo describes the situation when the Roxolans made their debut in the historical arena as allies of the Scythian king Palak in the war with Diophantos, a commander sent by the Pontic king Mithridates to help the inhabitants of Chersonesos Taurica. Strabo, writing more than a century after these events, cites this placement of the Roxolans as still contemporary with him. However, already by the middle of the 1st century, a new wave of nomads from the east, Aorces, followed by Alans, apparently forced the Roxolans to move to the right bank of the Dnieper. Since the second half of the 1st century, the Roxolans constantly appear as participants in attacks on the Danube frontier of the empire, raiding independently or in alliances with other barbarians. Later, the Roxolans take part in all major conflicts in the Danube region: the Dacian Wars of the beginning, the Marcoman Wars, and the Gothic Wars. The sources do not provide sufficient grounds to claim that by the beginning of the 2nd century, the Roxolans had completely left the right bank steppe. On the contrary, archaeological materials testify that the Roxolans constituted the bulk of the population of the steppe between the Dnieper and the Danube. However, the political center of the Roxolan Association, the royal headquarters, we must assume, moved to the lower reaches of the Danube. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, the Roxolans destroyed 2 cohorts of Roman troops in the winter of the 67th year. The following year, during the reign of the Roman Emperor Othon, they invaded Moesia. This campaign was a losing campaign. The Roman troops defeated the Roxolans, some of whom fled into the swamps where they died of cold and wounds. The treaties concluded with the Roxolans by the Roman Emperor Trajan and his successor Hadrian stipulated that the Roxolans provide security for the Danube limes, the fortified Roman border, in the lower reaches of the river. The last authentic mention of the Roxolans dates from the 270th year. They appear among the captives held in the triumphal procession of Emperor Aurelian, which crowned his victories over the Danubian barbarians. Apparently, the vicissitudes of the Gothic wars and the establishment of military and political domination of the Goths in the northern Black Sea region significantly reshaped the ethnographic map of the region. Most researchers assume that the Roxolans were part of the tribal union of the Alans, who were strategic partners of the Goths. As a separate military political force, the Roxolans ceased to exist. The way of life of the Roxolans was the same as that of other Sarmatian tribes. Nomadic people lived in a separate camp, transporting with themselves all property. Such trips were necessary to search for new territories and pastures. At Roxolans was perfectly developed cattle breeding that provided them with food throughout a year. Roxolans only stayed on the chosen territory for winter time, creating semblances of settlements. The rest of the year they searched for new and better territories. Roxolans were actively engaged in pottery, various crafts, processing of leather and metal. Amulets with images of animals, arrowheads, and samples of pottery have survived to our days. There are assumptions that agriculture was also developed to a small extent among this people, but it became rather an additional than the main occupation. A distinctive feature of the Roxolans, as well as other Sarmatians, was their attitude to women. Purely female burials were not uncommon, and the cult of the feminine was elevated to the goddess who gave life. At the same time, women Roxolans were often priestesses or warriors. They were no worse than men could keep in the saddle, throw arrows, and fight. The mentioning of Amazons living in the lands of Caucasus in many respects concerned not the mythical tribe, but these Sarmatian women, who amazed with their skills men warriors who came from other lands. By the way, there was an interesting legend about Amazons and Roxolans. It was believed that the Scythians and female warriors who inhabited neighboring territories started a long war in ancient times. Its outcome was never determined because of the skillful fighting skills of each side. Therefore, it was decided to end the protracted conflict, from which a new people later emerged. The mixing of Scythians and Amazons gave birth to the Sarmatians, including the Roxolans. Strabo left a detailed characterization of their uniforms. They have shells worn by all the leaders and nobles, and make them of iron plates fitted one to another, or of the hardest leather. They are really impervious to arrows and stones, but if a man in such a shell manages to fall to the ground, he cannot get up himself. According to Tacitus, the Roxolans were a weak army on foot, but few could withstand the onslaught of their mounted hordes.